Hungry Trilobite Podcast would like to start by acknowledging SoonerCon. Set sail once again for the high seas of Oklahoma's longest-running pop culture convention. A fun weekend awaits you full of cosplay, shopping, celebrity autographs, panels, and the after-hours events. Set up in the Embassy Suites in Norman, Oklahoma, you'll find a fantastic geeky weekend, June 19th through 21st, 2026. Visit SoonerCon.com for details. I love comedy. Genuine comedy is nutrition for the soul. It's the only real defense mechanism we have against life because life by its nature is completely absurd. So the only way we really have to prepare ourselves for that is to laugh. And laughter is our way of saying, I have a defense against the weirdness of this world. When you find a comic writer who has a long career, somebody who's spanned years, if not decades, that's somebody whose perspective is worth pursuing and paying close attention to. Now, I'll use, for one example, Kevin Smith. I first saw Clerks when I was in my teen years, and I watched Clerks 3 recently, and you will see that he changes his life perspective through this same story each time he makes a movie. And each time it tells a different, very truthful take on what life means to him at that point in time and what it might mean to us now. It gives us a chance to look at his whole perspective. And today's guest is somebody of a similar bent, and I would like you to review him as a whole, looking at his whole career. John Vorhaus wrote a comedy writing book many, many years ago, and he has written a new one recently, and I'm going to talk about what it takes to compare the two of those and what we would get out of it, and maybe what he's going to get out of the conversation too. Let's get started right now. This afternoon, we are joined with John Vorhaus. It's been a while since I've talked to you, buddy. How you been?
I'm doing great. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I've gotten your new book here, The Comedy Writer's Companion, and in an episode we did a while back, you and I talked about your original book, The Writer's Toolbox, and I loved that book. That book was one of the best how-to books on writing comedy I had pretty much ever read. So I was a bit intimidated picking this up. Yeah, and I say that because if you've already written an excellent book on the topic, you have one of two things you can do. You can retread the same information over again, or you can say, all that stuff I wrote before was garbage, here's the real thing. And you managed to not do either one.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me give you a little bit of context. First of all, thank you for that. The Comic Toolbox is now more than 40 years old. And it still has great legs. People are finding their way to it. I sold and shipped a copy off my website this very morning. So people still find value in it. I'm doing more and more international languages. I'm getting it translated into Portuguese as we speak. And a lot of good stuff is still happening with it. But it was my first book. And for my entire career, it was, in a sense, both a triumph and a burden, because if your first book is your most successful book by far, what does that say about the other 29 books that I've written? Along the way, I wrote a couple of short books. I wanted to explore specific topics, writing situation comedy and doing stand-up comedy in particular. And I let those books sit for about 10 years, and then I went back and looked at them, and I felt like I did a pretty good job of getting at what I wanted to get at, but I didn't really get to the bottom of both of those books, nor my other small book, The Comedy Writer's Companion. So I thought, let me see if I can put together a greatest hits version, an omnibus version of this. Not old wine in new bottles, but really go back and revisit all that text and add what needs to be added and squeeze out the stupid, and then add a bunch of new content so that The Comedy Writer's Companion is not just a greatest hits. There's more to it than that. And what I discovered when I was going through this was I'm feeling the passage of time. I've spent 40 years since I published the Comic Toolbox. I spent 40 years traveling the world teaching and training writers how to be funny. I've learned a few new things along the way, And I've also deepened my understanding of myself in profound ways. What I think, how I write, how I capture thoughts and put them on the page. And so it feels to me now like the Comedy Writer's Companion is a good bookend at the end of my career to serve as a companion to the book that stood at the beginning of my career. It has been described thus as the last word on comedy from the guy who wrote the first word on comedy.
That's a really good way to put it. And I'm glad that in describing it, you're leaning into the perspective you're putting on this because one thing I was kind of picking up on is that in the original book, you would have a way of saying, hey, here's a thing that works and this is what you should do. But then with this book, you circle back and kind of condense down again the perspective you've had and say, here's why it works. And one of the things you said in that first book that always struck with me is that if you're going to be almost be scared to deconstruct a joke because you're going to think it loses its charm, and you're much more comfortable saying with this book that just the practice, and you had a book on practice itself, remember
Mhm.
that, but just the practice of trying these things will actually increase your sense of humor. You will increase your enjoyment in the work. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I took away from it.
You can, I'm pleased to have you put those words in my mouth. Uh, I've been using the following observation in my current teaching. In the early days of my writing, for every 5 minutes I spent at my desk, I would spend 1 minute writing and 4 minutes worrying. Now, at the other end of my life, I spend 4 minutes writing and 1 minute worrying. It doesn't mean that I've stopped worrying. It doesn't mean that I've ever gotten away from fear. But just through practice, just through writing, I've become much more comfortable with the process itself, and I've come to value the process. Also, Aaron, if I can speak frankly to today's world, for a lot of us, the process is all we have. The opportunities that exist for writers in 2026 are very different from the opportunities that existed 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. To take one example, when I was coming up in situation comedy, it was still a viable path to move to LA, make phone calls, take meetings, get pitches, get work. That path is much different now. It's been replaced. There are other opportunities. I couldn't make my own sitcom on my iPhone 40 years ago. So there are opportunities that exist now that didn't exist then. But so much of what we face as writers, creative strivers in the modern world is just the onslaught of alternative information. For example, suppose you write a novel and you put it on Amazon, you independently publish it on Amazon and you hope to have it discovered. You can put the lowest price point on it you want. You're still competing against tens of thousands of titles that are offered all over the world for free, simply because everybody who creates wants their voice to be heard. Many people don't really care about making a living, they just want their voice to be heard. Well, if that's your paradigm, it's a respectable paradigm. There's still creative joy in creative practice. But if you're trying to make a living at it these days, my sense is that it's harder than it used to be, although maybe that's just because I'm older than I used to be. But in any event, if you can't find your way to finding joy in the work for the work itself, then you're just making your uphill battle that much harder.
Do you know, and I would never ask you to name names, but do you know of any comedy writers who truly don't enjoy the work, but they're just really good at it and managing to make money at it?
It's funny, I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and he asked me if I had ever been depressed. And I said, no, I don't really feel like depression is part of my neurochemistry. But I was mindful of a movie I made, a documentary I made a few years ago with Kevin Pollak, the actor and comedian, called Misery Loves Comedy. And it asked the question, do you need to be screwed up to do stand-up comedy, or does stand-up comedy screw you up? The answer is both.
Hmm.
But Kevin and I agreed that our practice of comedy comes from a place of joy, not suffering. And it's interesting because the people that we interviewed and ended up using in the movie, most of their comedy came from a place of great suffering, that they were using their comedy to deal with their trauma, their depression, their shit in the broadest sense of the word, but they didn't really seem to be enjoying doing what they were doing. So I know that there are a lot of comic practitioners who are just meeting a need for something that's deep within them. I'm not sure I've answered your question. Do I know of comedians who just write and are happy in the work? I'm sure there are.
The reason I was asking was when you're dealing with something like this, where it's so difficult to make a living at it, and it's not an enjoyable process for most people, if you're going to do it, you almost have to get some enjoyment out of it because the money's not going to be there. I mean, you can be a doctor just because you like the money. You can be a mechanic just because you like the money. I have a hard time thinking you could do this work and not get something out of it yourself, just because you may have an option.
I mean, in my career, I've done work for hire, and some of those jobs I didn't really have a lot of investment in the outcome. Right now, I'm thinking about horror movies. I wrote a horror movie, a thriller, and it really wasn't my thing. I took a certain amount of satisfaction in killing people in gruesome ways, but that's not where I live. But it was a problem-solving exercise, and I embraced it on that level as a problem solving exercise. From the beginning of my career, I've had a motto: never leave money lying on the table. If someone will pay me to work, I will work. If someone will pay me for words, I will give them those words. And I'll take pleasure and pride in doing that. But consider where I stand now. I've just written The Comedy Writer's Companion. It's released, it's out there. Now the question on the table is not what's my next book, but even should there be a next book? I stand in a point in my career where it kind of doesn't matter whether I write anymore or not. It's not going to change my standard of living. It's not going to make me more known than I am. My level of being known is pretty well plateaued. Some people know me. I'm not a celebrity, but I'm known to some. Uh, my next book isn't going to change that. I don't anticipate there's anything I could write that would materially change how I'm regarded as a writer and a creator in the world. So any choice that I make is a choice I must make for myself, that it answers some need within myself to write this book. Let me be less coy. The book that I'm thinking about writing is called How to Be Yourself, because I figure at this stage in my life, I know a thing or two about being myself. And part of me is really drawn to the work because it's a chance to reflect on my strategies for living an effective life and share those with other people. But part of me says, kind of why bother? If I'm if I can't find my way to the joy of the work, why do the work? And the problem with, as I describe it, writing my way into a book, there's never a lot of joy for me at the start of the process. There's a lot of joy later when the work has found its feet, and then I'm just taking something that's basically okay and making it much better. That's where I get my satisfaction. But for me to write that book requires a leap of faith that there will be enough satisfaction in it at the end of the day to have made it worth doing. And I'm withholding that decision. I'm noodling around with the idea. I'm not committed to it. I'm not writing it off. But I heard an actor speaking of acting, and he said, I'm an actor because I can't not be an actor. And I think part of what we deal with as creative types, no matter what we are, actor, writer, musician, artist, anything you can think of, the thing that draws us to the work is that we're compelled to it. Whether we think it's a good idea or not, whether we think we can make money on it or not, there's just this inner need that must be met. If you are in a position in your life where you can meet that inner need and not have to make it pay, that's kind of a blessing. Because if you have to devote so much time to putting food on the table that you never get time for your art or your craft or your writing, that's kind of dismal. And if you need your writing to pay, then it's serving two masters. You're trying to do something that A, brings you joy, and B, brings you a paycheck. In my career, I was fortunate enough to meet both of those conditions a lot of the time. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. But where I am now, where I don't need to worry so much about um, getting a paycheck, bringing in the money, I can focus on work that just brings me joy. But that's kind of an existential crisis. If all it's going to do is make me happy, and I'm not doing it for anybody other than myself, why do it at all? Is there that much joy in it, or is it more a compulsion. I'm writing because I have to write because I can't not write. Is it, oh boy, is it bringing me joy, or is it just staving off the sense of dread that comes from not being a productive person? I was writing this morning, I was writing to my nephews about my struggle to be retired from two things, my career and my ultimate frisbee career. Aaron, I don't know if you know that much about ultimate frisbee.
I've never played, but I've heard things.
Well, I played for 40 years and then tore my right rotator cuff. No problem. I learned to throw left-handed, and I played left-handed for 10 years, and then I tore my left rotator cuff. And I am just now in recovery from that second surgery. I don't have any arms left. There's no future for me in the sport. So I have to figure out a way to be okay with not doing something that's brought me joy my entire adult life. There's a parallel track that I'm following as I think about being an older writer, trying to come to terms with the fact that I don't need to work, that I can't work with the same level of commitment and passion that I once did, and that the arguments for working have changed a lot. In broad strokes, I'm trying to become comfortable with the idea of retiring, and I'm not making very good progress with it. As is evidenced by the fact that I reached out to you and said, hey, let's do another podcast. As is evidenced by the fact that I'm going back to Europe again this summer. I told myself I'm not touring in Europe this summer. It's too much aggravation. There's too much geopolitical nonsense in the world. But then somebody reached out and invited me to be keynote speaker at the, get this, big Festiwalowski comedy festival in Plock, Poland. I'm like, how can I say no to that?
I
How
love
can
the name.
I love the name. How can I not get on a plane to do that? So what we can extract from this, I guess I know that a lot of people that I'm talking to in this podcast are not in my stage of life. Whatever our stage of life is, there are always inner conflicts. And broadly speaking, the conflict is the conflict between the desire to do a thing and the fear to do a thing. I desire to be comfortably retired, but I fear to be comfortably retired. I desire to be okay with not playing Ultimate, but I fear to be okay with not playing Ultimate. For everybody in every stage of their career as writers, they desire to write, but they fear to write. I think that's axiomatic. So what's really important beyond doing the work is doing the self-examination, looking at ourselves as people who have conflict within and coming to terms with those conflicts through spiritual growth and self-understanding. And by spiritual growth, I don't mean, um, uh, voodoo or even religion in any sense, merely an acceleration of awareness and acceptance. Awareness, I see myself as I am. Acceptance, I am okay with myself as I am. On that platform, we can stand and look at inner conflict and feel quite okay with it and make deeper discoveries about it, and then feel even more okay about it. If I'm the age that I am, in conflict about what to do with the end of my life, that merely means that I am yet again increasing my self-knowledge. And I do certainly hope to increase my self-knowledge no matter what happens in the years to come. So from this end of my life to people at the start of their careers, and that's something that I'm really passionate about, is helping young strivers. You saw it in the book of practice, and I think this book, The Comedy Writer's Companion, is aimed at that audience as well. The things that vex us in our youth will vex us less when we're older. Different things will vex us later when we're older, but the challenge remains the same, coming to terms with who we are and being okay with who we are. So the time we spend asking ourselves what makes us tick, what makes us right, what makes us funny, all of these things will then turn around and deliver pure benefit. They will make us operate better. They'll give us better self-knowledge. They'll make us funnier. And that's why we set up and reinforce this positive feedback loop within ourselves.
I don't have an answer for you as to whether you should or shouldn't write this book, but I will say this. I don't know if a lot of the things you could have pitched here would have struck me. There might have been some things you could say, I'm going to write the ultimate Frisbee comic book history guide, and I'd be like, okay, have fun with that. But this potential book about what it means to be yourself, I would read that book. I would order that book as soon as I knew it was available, because number one, I like the way you look at things, but number two, that's a topic I'm struggling with a great deal right now. Not so much for myself, because in off mic, you and I had a quick chat about things that have been going on in my life, and I've embraced the fact that I am who I am and I enjoy the perspective I have. But I see so many people around me, both in my physical life and in the world, who clearly don't have that. And I think that's a problem our culture has right now. And I would like more people like yourself saying it's important to know who you are and what you're all about and not be judging yourself by other people's yardsticks.
Well, curse you, Aaron Bossig. Let me tell you why. The minute you said I would buy that book, the little hair on the back of my neck stood up. And it's not because I thought, oh, I can sell a copy, but because you triggered my sense of mission. If I can write the book and it helps people, how can I not write it? So in a sense, you're putting a thumb on the scale of, okay, John, write the damn book. So thank you, but also curse you for that.
I knew that that may be a factor, and it was. I almost felt like I had to say it because I don't know what your motivation would be if you wanted to have a good motivation, but helping people is never a bad one. It may not be the only one, but it's a good one to have.
That certainly has been my mission. And I've expanded my mission over time. That is, early on with the Comic Toolbox and related work, I understood that my mission was to help people be funny, how to be funny even if you're not. I wrote books on creativity that open the lens a little bit, how to be more generally creatively successful. I wrote a book on making art as I was making art for the first time. Stand up, I've taken my how to in a bunch of different directions. But in parallel, I found myself doing a whole other practice of educational consulting. And in this job, I help people get into top business schools, Harvard Business School, Stanford Graduate School of Business, Wharton School. This was my wife's enterprise, and I joined it a long time ago. And at a certain point, I found myself asking, what's the common denominator between the people I'm helping write comedy and the people I'm helping get into business school? And out of that question, I wrote the book of practice and proposed that the common denominator was identifying your practice and having a practice and engaging in that practice for the sake of advancing that practice. And that's true whether it's writing comedy or doing art or getting into business school or sports or romance or relationships or philosophy or theology or spirituality or anything. And when that happened, my sense of career pivoted to a sense of mission. And this also has to do with what happens when you get older and you start to ask yourself, what has been my legacy? And what can I do with the rest of my opportunity to create legacy? Now, I want to be clear on this because I think people have a misunderstanding of what legacy is. People think legacy is what happens after you're dead. Oh, he wrote the Comic Toolbox, and that's what he'll be remembered for. That's true to a certain extent. I regard the Comic Toolbox as my carrier wave. All of the other work that I've done will be carried into the future because the Comic Toolbox will definitely outlive me. I mean, it's lived for 40 years. It's got another 40 or more years into it. I think ultimately, with all due false modesty, it will take its place alongside the elements of style. It will do for comedy for generations what the Elements of Style has done for good writing. And the Elements of Style is now 125 years old. So, all right. So there is a book that will exist after I'm dead, and people will read it after I'm dead. But that's not what legacy is. Legacy exists now. Legacy exists in the work we do today. And even if all you're doing is writing a poem for your daughter on her 8th birthday and seeing the joy that's on her face, you are creating legacy in that moment because you're using your creative gifts to uplift and transform another person on the planet. So, coming out of this, I'm inspired to remind myself that my motto for the last stage of my life is finish hard. And maybe I shouldn't worry about whether I'm enjoying the work or what it all will mean. Maybe I should just remind myself that as a student of my own work, I need to engage in my practice just because my practice is there. And I need to work on my legacy because I can add to my legacy every day in a way that is fulfilling to me personally every day. So that.
Well, that encourages me, and I would definitely think that just it strengthens the argument of toward making the work. And I don't want to make it my mission to convince you to do it, but I do want to make a good argument in favor of it and let the actual decision fall on you.
All you'd have to do is buy one advanced copy, and then I'd be obliged to write text.
That's not a bad thought.
It's not a bad thought. No, because I want to I want to write it because I'm drawn to it, not because I'm responsible for it.
Sure. And ultimately, I want you to write the book that you're going to be happy with, that is going to encompass the view you want to put forth. You're entitled to that.
I can't help feeling all of this sounds like a luxury crisis. Do you know this expression, luxury crisis?
I don't know that.
Some people call it first world problems, but
I do know that, yeah.
yeah. But to me, a luxury crisis is if I'm someone listening to this, and I'm desperate to get my first novel published or my first stand-up comedy routine written, and I hear some guy talking about, geez, I just don't know if I have the gumption to write my 30-second book. I want to feel like that guy's having a problem I don't have. And he's got a problem that isn't really a problem at all. If your problem is you can't decide whether or not to write your 30-second book, you don't have a problem. This is my feeling.
That's fair.
Well, it's fair. It's fair from an outsider's perspective, but we don't live in the outsider's perspective. We live within our own perspective. So, in fairness to myself, I measure my motivations. I ask myself, do you want to do this? What's in favor of it? What's not in favor of it? And this is true for, should I write another book? Should I do another European tour? Should I should I get an MRI on my right shoulder just to see if it might actually have bounced back and I can start throwing right-handed again and play ultimate again? These are inner challenges, and they matter to me because they're my inner challenges. Again, I'm trying to draw a bridge between myself and other people. If what I'm going through sounds like a luxury crisis, I buy that. It sounds like a luxury crisis to me as I say those words. But what I'm going through is what you're going through as well. Different circumstances, different state of life, but the same inner conflict. I want to do something, but I also don't want to do that thing at the same time. How do I deal with that? So the nouns and verbs that surround my inner conflict are different from the nouns and verbs that surround your inner conflict or anybody else's inner conflict. But we look past the nouns and verbs, we look past the fact that mine is a luxury crisis, and we arrive at, here's a guy who is still doing what he's done all along, which is try to get to the bottom of himself. And if he's got a little easier time of it because the money is not as much of a problem, if he has a little easier time of it because he has found an audience and doesn't need to worry about finding his audience for the first time, then okay, more power to him. But he's still fighting the same fight. He still has the same inner struggle that every creative person has. And so I suppose I could say that even as I'm self-conscious about describing this as a luxury crisis, I kind of feel like if I am to be in service of writers yet to come, I have to expose my luxury crisis, because what else do I have to offer? I have to expose my inner process, because that is the thing that I have that I can communicate to other people.
Yeah. If
sorry,
a
would you like?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say there's an anecdote surrounding luxury crisis. It's not my phrase. My wife coined the phrase under very specific circumstances. In 1994, I was working in Australia as a network executive in charge of production and a consultant, creative consultant to the television network. It was my first and really only experience as a network suit. And I was staying in a furnished apartment in downtown Sydney. And once a week, I flew from Sydney to Melbourne. It's a 1-hour flight to oversee a comedy in production in Melbourne. And because I was working for the network, they flew me business class. I'm flying back and forth business class. And I felt like such a hotshot because I was flying business class. Yeah, I'm this guy, I'm this made guy. Well, one time I was flying back from Melbourne and I got to the airport late, and they had given away my seat in business class, and I had to sit in the back of the plane. And I got back to Sydney, and I went back to my apartment and I opened the door. under a complete cloud of misery, just grumble, grumble, grouch, grouch. And my wife says, "What's the matter with you?" And I said, "I had to fly coach." And she said these words, "You're having a luxury crisis." And, it hurt. It stung to hear those words, but what a marvelous life lesson, because it taught me what a luxury crisis looks like. It taught me how to feel okay with something in me that's just plain wrong, an attitude that was not appropriate to the situation and not deserved. It gave me a tool and a piece of information that I have shared with thousands and thousands of people since. So once I got past the sting, ouch, my feelings, my wife just called me out on my bullshit. I realized that I had been given a gift. And maybe that's something else we can think about. The stuff that hurts, hurts. But if we can look past the hurt, we can find the gift that lies beneath.
And somebody else struggling with that may not have the opportunity or the time to get a job in Australia where they have to fly business class once a week and then to have that very expensive lesson. You cut out all the bullshit for them and got right to the lesson. So that's kind of where I come at with the potential book. There is like, it may be a luxury crisis for you. It's a time saver for somebody else.
I'm taking that on board. If I am truly open to my experience, I must hear that and honor it and acknowledge it. So thank you for that.
Well, sure, sure. But speaking of TV here, I have to say, you touched on something at the beginning of the book that I, for selfish reasons, love, is that you spent a great deal of time talking about sitcom writing. And I like sitcoms. I'm known for being a sci-fi guy, as you can see back here, but I like sitcoms. They are my calm down material when I want to change moods, whether it's, whether I'm in a bad mood and I want to cheer up, or whether maybe in a good mood, I guess, okay, I got to dial it back a bit. Sitcoms are a great transition for me. I put them on when I'm working, and it seems like it's a genre that is on a bit of a decline right now. Is that it's not as popular, and the ones that are there don't really match what I'd call to be sitcoms. Maybe we're trying new things. Why did you spend a lot of time digging into that?
A lot of people want to write sitcoms. Sitcom is not dead. I
Good.
know from experience all over the world that people are still making situation comedies, and people are still coming to me for information about how to write them. I- let's break it down. As a genre, as a piece of entertainment, it has a place in the market. Sometimes it has a large place in the market. Sometimes it has a smaller place in the market. Sitcom has been cyclical for its entire existence. Sometimes it's more popular, sometimes it's less popular. The pendulum swings. I predict there will be an upsurge in sitcoms that are self-shot and self-released, shot on iPhones, simply because from a production point of view and a scripting point of view, it's a lot easier to get a sitcom right than a lot of other things. You can literally make a sitcom with one fixed camera under certain circumstances. I remember there was a sitcom in France years ago. It was about people who worked together in a factory, and they got together in their break room, and the camera angle was inside the snack machine. And so all of the activity took place in front of the snack machine with just one camera fixed in place. Very inexpensive, limited in scope, but quite doable. Um, there's a new sitcom in Switzerland that I just saw called Our Little Embassy, about a Swiss embassy in South America, that I quite liked. And it's very similar to a new sitcom in America called St. Denis, which is set in a hospital, but a similar set of characters with a similar set of problems. So people are still going to sitcom to explore character in funny ways. So the market exists. The market is changing. Maybe it's in a downswing, but it's not gone for certain. And because the technology is getting easier and more accessible, like I said, for reasons that I've stated, I think there will be an upswing in sitcom over time. But from a writer's point of view, I always describe sitcom as a gateway drug, because if you want to write scripted television or film, you can consider situation comedy, hour drama, serial drama, screenplays, limited series, dramatic, 8 episodes dramas. There are a lot of different ways to write scripted fiction. Sitcom is the smallest and the easiest of those by far. So a lot of people turn to sitcom at a certain time in their career where they've gotten good at writing jokes. Maybe they've, as I did, they come out of something like being a singer-songwriter. And say, okay, I did that. I wrote some songs. Clearly, I can't sing or play guitar. What am I going to do next? Try the next bigger thing. What is the next bigger thing? Sitcom. It's larger than what I've written before, but it's small enough that I can manage it. So in terms of figuring out how a story works and how a story is driven by emotional change, sitcom is really an effective way of learning these things. Because a lot of what you have to do in a sitcom is not that hard. You don't have to figure out, how am I going to shoot this? Where am I going to set it? If you say my sitcom exists in a living room and a kitchen, then you always know the action is going to be in one of those two sets, or maybe living room, kitchen, and a coffee shop down the street, as in the case of Friends, for example, 2 living rooms and a coffee shop. So you don't have to make decisions about where to set it. You don't have to make decisions about how the characters operate because you already know how those characters operate. You invented them, you put them into action, and now you're just putting them in new situations to see how they learn and grow. A lot of the decisions that you have to make, if, for example, you're writing a screenplay, you either don't have to make it all in a sitcom because you've already made them, or you can make them in severely constrained spaces because it's only going to be a half a dozen characters and it's going to be on standing sets and it's going to be more about people's relationships than solving crimes or robbing banks, just in the nature of sitcom. Elvis Presley told me in a dream once, a lifetime ago, the rules don't confine, they define. True genius works within form. Sitcom does a job of narrowly confining your creative choices. And as such, it makes it a lot easier to write a successful sitcom if you've never written a successful script before. That's why people are drawn to it, and they'll continue to be drawn to it.
Well, I'm
And if they
glad he
want to,
told you.
sorry, if they want to skip over that section in my book, they're welcome to.
Okay, well, I wouldn't advise doing that. And I would also, all Elvis did for me was tell me how to make a peanut butter sandwich. So he must have liked you a lot more. But when it comes to comedy, and I think we touched on this a little bit last time, but it seems like there's been a lot of discussion that maybe comedy itself is on a downswing, and I disagree with that completely. I just think that we're going through a metamorphosis right now. And we talked earlier that the world is got some troubles. We all feel challenged, and comedy is our way out, or at least on a psychological level. It's our way of not losing hope. And I think I'm seeing a lot of people reach for that, especially things like cartoons, especially right now. People love the healing power of just silliness and for its own sake. But also, we're getting a lot more attempts at good stand-up. I'm seeing a revived interest in improv, and we're seeing some actual funny movies come out where that was a gap we'd had for a while. I think that people are going to want to have these tools.
I will not predict the death of comedy. Comedy has existed since prehistoric times, presumably, and certainly has been existed since classical times. I mean, we have classic Greek comedies that are still present today. And I will quote you from an email I wrote this morning. What can we do to hold the wolves of the world at bay, but to beat them back with comedy? And I'm speaking about the political reality of America in 2026, the political reality of the world in 2026. There's a lot of shitty stuff going on. And so comedy is an answer to that. But comedy was an answer to COVID, and comedy was an answer to the uh, the Vietnam War, and comedy was an answer to the dull normalcy of the 1950s and to World War II and on back in time. Comedy is truth and pain. That's fundamental. Comedy is an answer to truth and pain and a response to truth and pain. You're feeling something, I'm feeling something. We know it's true, we know it hurts. We respond by telling a joke around it. The classic jokes, haven't had sex in a year. Celibate? No. Married. What's the truth and pain there? You're a married guy. You're not having as much sex as you used to. Every other married guy in the same circumstance has the same experience. And the joke speaks to the truth and pain of that moment. Or to take another example, this is my idea for my tombstone. I want the words on my tombstone to be, now I'm really bored. And there's a good solid joke there. The guy's dead. He can't be bored anymore because he's dead. But it speaks to the truth and pain of the fact that we're all going to die. We all have to deal with death. We all have to rage against it in some sense. Kind of the worse things get, the more comedy there is. Further to that point, when we ask ourselves who the funniest people in the world are, the answer is always people who suffer. Jewish humor exists, Irish humor exists, because these are downtrodden people. Apex nations don't generate comedy because they don't experience suffering in that sense. And people at the top of the food chain don't generate comedy. I think because they're afraid to, because they understand that comedy is by nature very subversive. And and the mere act of comedy is a challenge to the status quo. So yeah, no, comedy ain't dead. And it's not even dormant. It's different. That's all.
Sure, sure. I, as somebody who truly loves comedy, I never wanted to believe it was dead or even, that it was corrupted, I guess was the way people they framed it. Well, it's too sensitive now. And no, we're just changing the words we want to use to describe certain things. We've reevaluated how we feel about some topics, but nobody doesn't like to laugh. That's still a thing. We talked earlier about how uh, you know, people who like their work or dislike their work. And if you think back to the last time you and two or three friends got together and spent an afternoon, maybe having a drink or a sandwich and just laughing and telling jokes, none of you was having a bad time. And
Correct.
but you probably were at least mulling over some mutual pain that you appreciated on each other's behalf. That's probably was a topic of conversation, and you're offering that as almost a therapy to somebody. You know exactly which joke you can tell to make them feel a little bit better.
Let's imagine that you and I were fans of the same sports team and it was just a terrible team. We could have a competition to see our team sucks. Who can communicate, who can convey how badly they suck the worst. They suck because I don't even know what those lines would be. But if we spent our time talking about making fun of how bad our team sucks, we're going to feel better about it. Our team sucks, and that's our commonly held truth and pain.
Yeah.
Sorry, you touched on something that's worth passing through. Norms change. We've been through a period of time with stand-up comedy where stand-up comics had to change their tone to respond to cancel culture, to respond to the risk of being canceled. And this is something that I addressed in the Comedy Writer's Companion in the section on stand-up comedy, because the question is valid. If you want to be um, the sort of person in society that you want to be, somebody who uplifts other people, then you need to address certain topics in ways that your father or grandfather wouldn't have to address them. We can't tell Polish jokes or Indian jokes the way people in the past could. So the challenge remains, if we want to find comedy in those areas, how do we go about it? And I gave that some thought and did some writing and some thinking. And I kind of came up with the idea of you can make fun of anyone you want as long as you demonstrate honor for the subject. If you say to yourself, I'm making fun of this for the sake of exploring an issue, not for the sake of making those people feel bad, then you can get away with anything. And you can also make fun of anything if you turn the target on yourself. Let me give you an example of what I mean. In 2008 or so, I was in Russia. I was making the Russian version of Married with Children at the same time that Phil Rosenthal, the creator of Everybody Loves Raymond, was making the Russian version of Everybody Loves Raymond and also doing a documentary on it. And my Russian friends were all afraid that he was going to make fun of them, and the documentary would be about how quaint or stupid or ignorant the Russian people were. But he did something so smart that I went to school on and I've always remembered. He never once made fun of the Russians. He only made fun of how out of touch he was with what was going on around him. The joke was not the Russians are stupid. The joke was, I cannot understand how the Russians are operating. It did a great job of letting people enjoy watching the Russians behave in ways that were quite funny without disrespecting them. So in the past, you can make fun of somebody and not worry about disrespecting them. In the modern world, you have to worry about disrespecting them, but you can still find the funny as long as you honor your topic or turn the joke on yourself. The way I boil this down for my own experience as an older person is it's okay for me to make jokes about being a clueless senior citizen. It's just not okay to be a clueless senior citizen. And it's a crucial distinction.
It is. And I was really glad you brought up Married with Children there. We talked about that before. It is one of my favorite shows. It's arguably one of my favorite sitcoms. Definitely top 3 material. But it's weird for me to say that because in, say, the 40s, 50s, and early 60s, there was this trend of humor. It's I hate my spouse humor. Wives that hate husbands, husbands that hate wives. They just don't want to be married. They're miserable. And this is a constant punchline that I don't find funny. I'll just tell you, that tone of humor, I've never enjoyed it. I've always wondered, look, these people, I was like, why do you even want to have this life? But I love Married with Children because in my mind, that show isn't actually based on that. For all the friction you'll see between Al and Peg or Marcy and her spouse of the week, it was not that they hated each other, but that they had to go through life's frustrations together. Again, crucial distinction. And you could be forgiven for thinking that's what it is, but no, there's a genuine affection there, but the world is sitting on them the whole time they have to deal with it.
And the evidence is clear. If they genuinely hated each other, they would not stay together. The fact that they stay together, that they identify as a family, means that on the surface they're hating each other, but underneath they love each other. Well, guess what? That's conflict. That's inner tension. That's what makes that show work. And by the way, as someone who has taught and trained writers all over the world in places where Married with Children is known, everyone says that Al Bundy, he's just like us. Nobody identifies with any sitcom character anywhere in the world as much as people identify with Al Bundy, according to my limited survey of the subject, because he's a lovable loser, and that's a common archetype. And it speaks to something deep within, because if you are suffering within your family, not because you don't love them, but as you say, because life is hard and there's a lot of friction, and sometimes you project that friction onto your family because you can't do anything against the world. And somebody comes along and says, you think you have it bad? Look at these people. They have it 1,000 times worse than you, and they're still together somehow. That's very gratifying. That's soul satisfying. I worked on a sitcom once in development in Norway, and the concept was a 13-year-old girl has the world's worst mother, just a monstrous mother. And the beauty of it was, if you're a 13-year-old girl watching that show, you know your mother is a monster. But if you can watch the relationship between a 13-year-old girl and a mother who's 10 times worse, 1,000 times worse than your mother ever could be, consciously or unconsciously, you extract from it the message that, hey, I don't have it so bad. I can tolerate this. And that's what makes sitcom work, because the underlying message is it's not all that bad. It's not as bad as you think it is. Here are people who have problems that are like yours, but worse, and somehow they're coping. Let's take the class of workplace comedies. Let's look at Jim and Dwight in The Office. Everybody who's ever worked in an office has a Dwight. And there's something so satisfying about seeing Dwight hoisted on his own petard over and over and over again. Because in the real world, you can't do that. You can't call that guy on his bullshit because he might be your boss. Or if he's not your boss, he's your coworker, and you still have to deal with him tomorrow. So you repress a lot of your feelings. And now a sitcom comes along and says, you can get those feelings off your chest by sitting down and enjoying a half an hour of The Office and watch Dwight get what's coming to him. It's soul satisfying. And so, again, to our question, is comedy dead? Is sitcom dead? Not as long as that there's need for this kind of soothing. My wife and I are rewatching a sitcom called My Boys. It's on Amazon Prime, and it's from the 1990s and early 2000s. It's about a young female sports writer in Chicago and her poker buddies. And we're watching it as you described it. We're watching it as comfort food. At the end of the night, after we've watched like intense drama or thrillers or something like that, we need something to cleanse the palate and ease us down. And so we watch an episode of that. And even though it's a generation later, the challenges of young people finding their way in the world, finding love, identity, companionship, camaraderie, uh, it's all still there and it all still works. So a good sitcom is at once very specific and very universal. And this is why I mentioned one sitcom from Switzerland set in a South American embassy is very much like an American sitcom set in a hospital. How are those things the same? Because people in the cast have questions around their self-worth that they're trying to address in the context of their workplace.
I'm amazed that you kind of phrased it that way, because I'm watching The Office now, and this is actually my first time genuinely watching it, because it was one of those shows that every time I tried to watch it, I would catch the same 2 episodes over and over again. And the reason I didn't watch it when it was first on is that it was first on in the mid 2000s, and at that point in my life, I was working a crappy office job in Scranton. So I didn't have the time to watch it because I was living that
it.
life. And now I see it and it feels like it's hyper specific for me to have a flashback to my early 20s. And it's very strange. And I know why it has the appeal, but it is so strange for me to like watch other people get into it and who have been into it far longer than I have. It's like, but they just see their lives there too. So, yeah, but I recognize all these places. And it's like I say, it doesn't the setting can be anything. It's the window dressing, but sometimes it's the flavor that makes all the difference.
2 points. One, it has been said that comedy is tragedy plus time. You're sufficiently far removed from your Scranton years that you can view them from a safe distance. And the other, comedy is cruelty. A thing isn't funny to the person it's happening to, it's funny to the people watching. So we watch a show like The Office and we can see the suffering. Married with Children, we can see the suffering. The people in it, it's not funny to them. They're not having a good time, but they're not intended to have a good time because they're not real people in the real world. They're comic characters whose job is to suffer so that we can watch them suffer and enjoy that experience and draw conclusions from our own life. Again, I'm thinking about The Office with Jim's uh, unrequited romance for Pam in the early seasons, ultimately requited. But here's a guy who is suffering love. He's in love with someone and he can't bring himself to say it. Well, anybody who's ever been in that situation can identify with it, can get value out of watching somebody else go through it, but also can get a certain amount of pleasure of saying, well, at least that's not me. At least that's not me right now. And this is what drives comedy. That guy over there just slipped on a banana peel. At least it wasn't me. And since he's a rich guy, or he's an arrogant guy, or he's conceited, or he's venal or mean or cruel, and he deserved to slip on a banana peel, then I can not only laugh but experience a sense of triumph. That's kind of comedy at its most basic form. We watch people suffer and we experience laughter and a sense of triumph.
You're giving out not just great comedy advice, but great life advice in general. If nothing else, I encourage people to just mull this over and see how it makes you feel in general. I'm going to give you a chance to tell people, where can they find your book, where can they check out your Substack, and generally where can they follow your adventures in the world?
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. The newest thing is the Substack. I've started the Substack because I'm not managing my retirement very well. I keep doing new things. But the Substack is just my name, John Vorhaus on Substack. Easy enough to find. Likewise, I'm on Facebook under my name. And I'm on LinkedIn under my name, and different people use different platforms, and those are the three that I'm involved with. My website, coincidentally, also my name, johnvorhaus.com, and my Amazon author page is amazon.com/author/JV. I got into Amazon very early on, and I got my initials for my Amazon author page, so that was awesome. On those websites, you can find, of course, the Comic Toolbox and the Comedy Writer's Companion and the Book of Practice and a bunch of my other books, my novels. It's all there. And also from any of those platforms, you can reach out to me directly. And and that's not a come on, that's an invitation. Throughout my career, I think one thing that I've done really right is to make myself accessible to people, make it really easy for people to find me and reach out to me and just say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. To the point where I always offer the 5-minute promise. People I don't know, people I've never met can reach out to me and ask me to help them with what they're dealing with. And I always say, I will help you in any way I can to the limit of my ability, so long as it doesn't take more than 5 minutes and I don't have to leave my desk. Because it turns out that there's quite a lot I can accomplish in 5 minutes sitting at my desk. And it is my honor and my mission to contribute to people's creative experiences or life experiences in those ways. If people have never read any of my works, of course, the Comic Toolbox is a great place to start. But now the Comedy Writer's Companion is also a great place to start. It's kind of a more mature take on what comedy is and what comedy writing is. And in between them lies the Book of Practice. And I just have to say, because I always have to say this, the Book of Practice is absolutely my cherished child. If people read no other of my books, but they find their way to that one, that's the one that will transform them and really make a difference, especially if they're young in their process, no matter what it is. And every time I sell a copy of that, I get a special thrill. And I especially get a special thrill when I sell a print copy, because then I get to put the book in a mailer and take the book to the post office and send it off into the universe with the clear knowledge that it's going to a place where it has the chance to make real impact. Plus, I always sign the books that I send, print versions that I send through my website, though you can also get digital versions. I can't sign those, but they are available. And the stuff is relatively inexpensive. I keep my prices low because I want word to get out. So yeah, that's about it. If you want print copies signed, go to johnvorhaus.com. If you want digital copies, you can find them on Amazon or on my website. If you want print copies from delivered outside of America, you kind of have to go to Amazon for that because I can't ship overseas. It's just too expensive.
Yeah, well, John, everything you just said here is going to be on my website, aaronbossig.com. Plus, I'm also going to include links to our previous chats. I really encourage people to look you up there. Thanks so much, and I'm glad to have you back anytime.
My pleasure. Go sports team.
I would like to thank John for being my guest today, and I would like to thank you for listening. And I want to open up this conversation about comedy because comedy is a very personal thing. What one person finds funny, someone else may not, and that's okay. We talked about Kevin Smith at the beginning of this show. John and I talked about Married with Children and The Office, and you may have your own feelings on these things, and I want to hear those feelings. If you have somebody who's made you laugh, and you find that there's a value in what they bring to the world, I would like to hear about it. Reach out to me at bossigpodcast@yahoo.com. Find me on Instagram or Blue Sky at Aaron Bossig. You can subscribe to this show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, any of the other major podcast platforms. Go ahead, check us out. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.